Hello, everyone, and thank you for that introduction. I'll be interviewing Bill Gates, who needs no introduction, but here is a very quick one anyway. Most of the world knows Bill as Microsoft co founder and co chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As most of you in the audience are probably aware, he's also founder of Breakthrough Energy, a rapidly growing network of investment vehicles, philanthropic programs, policy advocacy, and other activities committing to scaling the technologies we need to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Bill, hello. It's great to see you again.
Hi.
So, you've had decades of experience across such different areas of society and technology. What makes clean tech investments uniquely different and arguably the most challenging than everything else you've done in your life?
Well, the physical economy, including making paper, plastic, steel, cement, is very well developed. It's been optimized literally over centuries, and for the rich countries, the R&D on changing those things is extremely low. It's not where hot shots go. They go and work on software or financial markets or perhaps new medicines rather than immersing themselves in cement or the making of cement. And so we're turning to these areas and adding this gigantic constraint that they can't emit any greenhouse gases. We're having to reinvent, rethink something that hasn't changed much and hasn't gotten many resources, and it's actually very conservative. The reliability of steel, cement, super important, and the numbers involved are very large. The number of factories that we have to change, but we're barely started because our metrics had us focus on the easy stuff. Now, people are recognizing finally that to get to zero, you have to do the hard stuff, not just the passenger cars or a little bit of renewable generation.
So many venture capitalists remember the clean tech boom 1.0 that burst about a decade ago. I think it's safe to say we're in another clean tech boom. What are the risks that this one could burst too?
Yeah, that one wasn't actually that large. I mean, it was a very small number of venture capitalists. And I doubt more than 10 billion was deployed, and the returns were poor enough that the financial focus shifted away from that. By the time of the Paris climate talks in 2015, there was almost nothing going on because of the failures there. And there were some good lessons that came out of that in terms of the need to work with big companies, the need to have more patience, more capital, and the need to really look at the very difficult economics. And this wave now, we are talking about significant amounts of capital. That's very helpful. It's allowing a lot of these companies to get off the ground. The Breakthrough Energy Ventures work has gone way better in terms of finding good ideas and developing those ideas and getting co-investors. As those ideas progress, though, the scale of capital also gets very large. Just to do pilot projects, there's kind of a valley of death where you often will need up to $1 billion to prove out efficiency and quality at scale. So, it would be terrible to go through another negative period because we basically have about 10 years to invent these things and prove them through pilot projects that they are very economic, and then 20 years when their green premium is very tiny or zero to replace all the factories that we have today.
So you mentioned Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Can you talk about that a little bit more? BEV has been at this a lot longer than others. In what unique ways is it pursuing investments that could be lessons for others?
Yeah, as part of the Paris meeting where I participated in governments committing to triple their R&D, they asked me to commit that there would be capital to take on the ideas that would come out of that R&D work. And so, BEV raised fairly soon after that its first billion-dollar fund. That went into a little over 40 companies. Now we have a second billion-dollar fund going into additional companies. And the depth of expertise is very unusual because this is a venture group that only does companies whose work could have a dramatic effect on climate mitigation. So very narrow focus, very deep understanding of the technology, willingness to help build management teams, to incubate companies, to bring together two nascent companies and say that they should make a single company. That's happened 3 or 4 times. And so very broad value added, and also willingness to help endorse these things so that investors who are a little less specialized get comfortable with these kinds of investments. So here we are. I'm quite excited, even in the tough areas like direct air capture, hydrogen, steel, aviation fuel. A lot of great ideas and quite a variety of approaches that even though we'll have a high failure rate, I think there's enough there that we have a likelihood of substantial success, particularly if we can get the policies that cause these technologies that start out with still pretty significant green premiums, get them scaled up so that the magic that happened with solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, that the learning curve with volume, even the early volume, the only volume that was like 4% of what the volume is today, got the rapid price reduction. So we need that across all these technologies. And coming out of the pandemic, some governments are committing substantial sums. Now, will governments spend that money wisely, connecting up to the best technology? That's a big priority for the next 5 to 10 years. That money's going to be spent. So helping it be spent in an effective fashion across all the categories is the Breakthrough Energy new efforts, one we call Catalyst, being at the center of that, is to help with that next stage and make it so not just rich countries and rich companies can kind of say, hey, I took care of my problem, but rather we come up with solutions that are achievable for all countries and all companies.
Is Catalyst hoping to help solve the Valley of Death problem that you mentioned a couple minutes ago?
Absolutely. And part of it is by getting governments to put forward some money for these projects, to put forward tax credits that bridge the green premium and try to bring market forces to bear on that. And tying up, we need big companies, we need the small innovative companies, we need governments. Governments have a lot of reason to be involved because if you pick the right projects, then you're going to create jobs in these new industries that can help make up for the fact that a lot of the, say, coal mining or other hydrocarbon-related jobs will actually go down quite dramatically as we start to achieve the path to zero.
You talk a lot about time, both in your book and in conversations leading Breakthrough Energy. And time, as you know more than most, is not on our side. It takes many decades, if not more than a century, for energy systems to transition. That's too slow to avoid a climate disaster, as you write in your book. It's also too slow for venture capitalists, most of whom are used to getting returns in less than a decade. Will VCs have to get more patient to invest in climate tech, or will climate tech paybacks happen more quickly as the tech itself develops?
Well, the Catalyst effort will accelerate the learning curve, and therefore, for the successful technologies, the cost curve will move quickly. Even though solar was such a success, we don't have as much time. There were about 20 years where it was very low volume, and subsidies from Germany and Japan at the very beginning were key to even that volume so that industry stayed alive and kept making progress. We can't go 20 years here because we have that deadline where we want to get to zero to avoid the most damaging effects. So it's a bit unnatural. It's never been done before to move at this speed. People who follow this field and document it, best of all, like Václav Smil, remind us that this is unprecedented. That the base that we have to replace is so gigantic that the willingness to pay higher prices, for heating homes or, taking a long distant trip or buying an airline ticket, or building basic shelter in a middle income country, the willingness to take that pain now, so hoping that all the pieces add up to get the gain, avoiding big problems out in the future, that is not a typical thing that's easy to pull off, and yet that's the imperative here. So we do need to move it at high speed. I am impressed that other venture funders are coming into these. It hasn't been a challenge to get co-funding, but that ebullient funding environment, we can't count on it being there, even for the next decade.
Do you think all this new money that's been coming into climate tech investments over just the last year or two, is it going to the right places, to the hard to abate sectors that we really need to clean up to tackle climate change?
Yes, bringing money into the hard categories is what's most critical right now. Just being part of financing a solar field where the green premium is pretty close to zero, that's valuable. And we need lots of money like that. Thank goodness that's not hard, because we need trillions out there. We need billions or tens of billions in the hard categories. And so the fact that a combination of venture or other private capital, private companies like the partners, the 7 inaugural partners for Catalyst, they're bringing in, some cases as much as $100 million. That is contributing and will shorten those time frames. So it's a broad range of capital types, from venture way at the early stage, and then just sort of normal big investment pools. But this middle piece is where we have to be the most creative.
You talk a lot about the role of government. You talk to politicians and rural leaders every day. What do you hear from them about investments in this space? Do you think they understand it? Do you think they're up to the task to bring the policy along that needs to happen in order to make these investments profitable? And what are you hoping happens in the next couple of years and leading up to the Glasgow Climate Summit?
Well, the politicians, sometimes they'll think, okay, we'll just use regulation. If they're committed to the cause, then they can say, okay, we won't let you have a gasoline car, or we won't let you heat your house with natural gas, or do a construction project that's not using green cement. They have to hope, though, that the extra cost they impose there, that they're not, creating this incredible backlash about why, who is bearing that burden. Or as you have these shifts in jobs where it's very visible, some of the jobs that are going away, that doesn't create a, hey, why us, why now? If everybody else doesn't go along, maybe we'll take the pain but not even get the gain. So politicians, they need the innovation to make the scale of the sacrifice, even in rich countries, a lot less than today's technology would be. And that's why I proposed this, the progress in reducing green premiums as one of the metrics that we should constantly track and say, okay, if one is doing well, area is doing well on that, can we duplicate those tactics? If one is falling behind, do we need to shift resources on IQ and project money into that area? Because you simply can't ignore any one of the areas. Industrial, broadly defined, is actually bigger than any of electricity generation or transport or buildings or agriculture. And many of the hardest problems are in that slice of emissions. And that, I think it's only recently people have realized that just passenger cars and power generation is less than a third of what we need to do. It was the first third to go after, but we can't do this serially where we go after that and then start working on the rest of it.
So you've been investing in climate technologies either through Breakthrough Energy Ventures or your own investments for some 15 years. What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
Well, my climate investing is not purely return driven. So the fact that many of the battery companies, Acquion, A123, a whole bunch, weren't able to do well. Even if I'd kind of known that, it was okay that I took risks. There's some like QuantumScape, Ambry, and a few others that are still out there. One called Form Energy, which was pulled together with the support of Breakthrough Energy Ventures. So it is more promising now, and there are lessons of the companies that didn't do well. So we had to get in and try things. Kior was converting wood into biofuels. The plant was built, and the difficulty of getting the efficiency and making that a reliable process, turned out to not be economic. So that was also a dead end. Still, I don't feel that bad about it. As of right now, actually, the investments do actually have a positive return, but that isn't how I'll measure whether my involvement was appropriate. It's all based on helping the world get to zero.
So for most investors, they want to make a return probably a little bit sooner than you're prepared to wait. What advice do you have for people who want to invest in climate technology, but maybe who don't have the patience to wait? Is there a certain area of these technologies you think they should invest in?
Well, the people who take the high risk on the hard areas are the ones who deserve credit for trying to solve the global problem. If you want low risk, this is, you can be part of financing solar fields, but then you're, at that point, you don't deserve any more than just, say, a bond like return, nothing significant. This is like the early days of software and computing, except that the capital requirements are higher. The need for governments to set encouraging policies is much higher. And, we should care about this enough that, unless you give immense credit to the impact of what's going on, it may not be the right space, for somebody who can't afford risk, or, if you expect near-term returns. It's, I would look elsewhere.
But it sounds like also the payoff could be huge, right? If given the amount of change we need to see in our energy systems and economy, is that right?
Yeah, for the winners, anybody who invested in Tesla is feeling very smart because they got the impact that they're pioneering high quality electric cars, which is, one step towards passenger cars having zero emission, along with getting the electric grid that they're connected up to be zero emission and have the additional capacity, because that's a meaningful additional load. So yes, there will be 8 Teslas, 10 Teslas, and only one of them is well known today. So if you pick well, there will be Microsoft, Google, Amazon type companies that come out of this space. But there'll also be, the hundreds of, like there were in the IT space, being careful about the ones that we give more capital to are the ones where at the lab level, as much as we can, we prove out what the economics are going to look like. That's an exercise for investors to be very careful. Some things can be proven out at the lab level. Some things like nuclear fusion, nuclear fission, even some of these storage things, until you build projects that are hundreds of millions, or in the case of nuclear, billions, you're not quite sure whether you're going to be able to contribute or not.
I want to end with a really quick lightning round question, Bill, for our final question. When it comes to investing in climate tech, what is exciting you the most right now?
The agriculture space, which if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said is every bit as tough as the industrial space. I'm amazed at the variety of companies and good ideas there. The scale compared to mainstream agriculture is still tiny, but I really do see the costs are coming down, the quality's going up. So that whole category is quite impressive to me. The fact that even in the tough areas now, there's 4 or 5 different approaches. Clean hydrogen, direct air capture, steel. Although a lot of the steel ones are dependent on getting clean hydrogen that's very, very cheap, like a dollar a kilogram. There are a few other approaches, but that you'd have to say is where most the bets are. So we're covering the space of problems. I don't have a single thing that there aren't companies, someone who's very committed that they think they've really got the solution. And, right now, their access to capital is very, very strong. We created an early stage program, which we call Fellows, for people who have ideas that aren't ready for ventures type funding. And even there, the number of applicants, even when we restricted it to people working in the tough areas, we had 20 times the applicants, very high quality, picked 17, and now they're off to the races.
Well, that's great. I want to thank you very much, Bill, for this great conversation, and to the audience for tuning in. I'll now hand things back to a host at the SOSV Climate Tech Summit.